July 28, 1943, Camp Swift, Texas. The dust hung suspended in the afternoon heat, like ground glass, each particle visible in the slanting light that cut through the infirmary windows. Greta Hoffmann pressed her palm against the cool metal of the medical cabinet, steadying herself against the vertigo that still came in waves since capture. Outside, the compound fence shimmered in the heat, and beyond it, America stretched endlessly in every direction. She was prisoner W4487 now. Nothing more. Before we continue with what happened next, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you these untold stories of World War II every week, and we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. Your support helps us preserve these remarkable moments of history that deserve to be remembered. Greta had been trained to save lives in field hospitals where artillery screams provided the soundtrack to surgery. She had held soldiers together with sutures and prayer across North Africa. Now she organized bandages in a Texas prison camp while her two sons grew up without her in Munich. The Americans treated her with professional distance. Not cruel, but careful. Always careful. She had expected monsters. The propaganda had been specific. Instead, she found something far more unsettling. Ordinary people conducting a war with industrial precision. And then a child's scream shattered everything she thought she understood about being the enemy. The journey to Camp Swift had taken 4 days by train. 43 German women, rattling through the American heartland in cattle cars that had been retrofitted with benches. Greta had pressed her face against the gaps in the wooden slats, watching darkness give way to dawn, revealing a landscape that seemed to mock everything Berlin radio had promised about American weakness. The cities were intact. The farms were abundant. The factories ran day and night, their smokestacks painting the horizon with the signature of limitless production. At Bastrop Station, a young corporal with sunburned cheeks had handed her a canteen of cold water. The gesture was small, but it cracked something in the narrative she'd been fed. In 1943, Germany's oil production had collapsed to 33 million barrels annually. America produced 54 times that amount. She didn't know those numbers yet, but she could see the evidence everywhere, in the fuel that powered the trucks, in the rubber tires that didn't split, in the abundance that felt obscene after years of rationing. Camp Swift sprawled across 30,000 acres of scrub oak and endless sky. The women's compound sat separate from the main facility, a collection of wooden barracks surrounded by chain-link fence and guard towers that looked almost decorative. The dust was immediate and invasive, coating everything, infiltrating every breath. Captain James Morrison ran the infirmary with surgical precision. He examined Greta's credentials with the thoroughness of a man who trusted nothing and verified everything. "You'll work under supervision," he said, his English clipped and formal. "No access to medications without approval. No unauthorized treatment protocols. Are we clear?" Greta nodded. Her English was functional, learned from medical journals that had circulated freely before the war turned knowledge itself into contraband. "Yes, sir." Very clear. The days developed a rhythm that felt almost normal. Dawn brought roll call when the sky turned from black to purple to the burning blue that would dominate until evening. Work assignments followed. Then meals that contained more meat than Greta had seen in 2 years. The abundance was staggering. American soldiers complained about the food. She ate every bite and marveled at their complaints. The American nurses treated her with careful neutrality, not warmth, but not cruelty either. She cleaned instruments, changed bandages, under watchful eyes, organized supplies with the precision that had defined her work when death arrived in wholesale quantities. The wounded came through. Soldiers recovering from training injuries. The occasional prisoner from the men's compound with work-related wounds. She kept her head down, spoke little, and observed everything. By midsummer, she could anticipate Captain Morrison's needs before he voiced them. Her hands remembered the muscle memory of wartime triage even in this strange, quiet setting where death felt impossibly distant. The heat pressed down like a physical weight, turning the infirmary into a furnace by midday. She learned to work in the early morning hours when the air still held mercy. 8 miles away, Bastrop sat baking under the same merciless sun. Sarah Mitchell ran the general store with her husband, Tom, their days consumed by inventory and rationing notices and constant worry about their son fighting somewhere in the Pacific. Their daughter Emma was 7 years old, bright-eyed and curious, with a tendency to wander that aged Sarah prematurely. The town had never seen Germans before the camps opened. The propaganda posters showed monsters. The reality was more complicated. Women who looked tired. Men who worked fields with the same efficiency as local farmhands. Nobody knew what to do with that complication. On Thursday afternoon, July 28th, Emma wandered farther than usual. She'd been chasing butterflies through the tall grass behind the store, her laughter carrying across empty fields. Then she stumbled upon rusted farm equipment half buried in earth, its sharp edges hidden by vegetation. She fell hard. The metal tore through her leg like a surgical blade, precise and devastating. The wound opened deep, severing the femoral artery with mechanical efficiency. Emma's scream echoed across the empty prairie, but no one heard. She was too far from town, too deep in the scrub where sound got swallowed by vastness. She tried to walk, made it 20 feet before dizziness forced her down. The blood kept coming, soaking through her dress, pooling in the dust that drank it greedily. The butterflies continued their dance, indifferent to her terror. She was 7 years old, and she was dying alone in the Texas heat. At Camp Swift, Greta was restocking bandages when the call came through. A work detail clearing brush near the eastern fence had heard something. A child's cry, distant but unmistakable. The information moved up the chain of command with agonizing slowness. Guard to supervisor to watch commander to Captain Morrison. Morrison grabbed his medical kit and turned to Greta. "Come with me. We may need extra hands." They found Emma 20 minutes later, conscious but pale, her leg a catastrophe of blood and torn tissue. Morrison knelt beside her, his assessment instant and professional. "Severed artery. She's lost too much blood already." Greta was beside him before he finished speaking. Her hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had worked battlefield triage, where seconds meant the difference between a soldier going home or going into the ground. She pressed directly on the wound, her fingers finding the arterial bleed by instinct, applying pressure with exactly the right force to slow the hemorrhage without causing further damage. "Tourniquet," she said, her English clipped by urgency. Above wound. Now. Morrison hesitated for only a second. In that moment he saw not a prisoner, but a fellow medical professional in crisis mode. Then he complied. Together they worked, Greta's hands steady, as she held pressure while Morrison secured the tourniquet. their movements synchronized by shared training that transcended nationality, transcended war, transcended everything except the immediate imperative to save a child's life. Emma's eyes found Greta's face, wide with pain and fear. Greta began speaking softly in German, her voice dropping into the soothing cadence she'd used with wounded soldiers, with frightened patients, with the dying who needed to hear that someone was there. The child couldn't understand the words, but tone needed no translation. "Stay with me," Greta murmured, switching to broken English. "You are a strong girl. Stay with me." The bleeding slowed. Emma's breathing stabilized. Morrison radioed for an ambulance while Greta maintained pressure, her knees in the Texas dust, her uniform soaked with an American child's blood. Time moved strangely. Each second felt infinite. The heat pressed down. The child's pulse fluttered under her fingers like a bird deciding whether to fly or fall. The ambulance arrived 15 minutes later, but by then the critical window had passed. Emma would survive. Morrison said it quietly as they loaded her onto the stretcher, his voice containing something that might have been respect. Without immediate intervention, she would have bled out in another 10 minutes. "Your response saved her life." Greta said nothing, just watched the ambulance disappear down the dirt road, carrying the child back toward town, back toward a life that would continue, because a German prisoner had held an artery closed with bare hands and spoken comfort in a language of enemies. The news reached Bastrop before the ambulance did. Small towns have invisible threads of connection that move information faster than radio. By the time Emma arrived at the local clinic, already stabilized and out of danger, the story had spread through every diner and general store and church fellowship hall. A German prisoner, a nurse from enemy forces. She saved Emma Mitchell's life. Sarah Mitchell sat in the clinic waiting room, her hands shaking, as the doctor explained what had happened. The arterial bleed, the blood loss, the immediate expert intervention that had prevented her daughter's death. If that German nurse hadn't known exactly what to do, the doctor said carefully, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. Sarah's first emotion was gratitude, pure and overwhelming, the kind that comes when death has been averted at the last possible moment. Her second emotion was confusion, a deep dissonance between what she'd been told about the enemy and the reality of a woman kneeling in the dirt, saving an American child with her bare hands. By evening, the town had divided itself along invisible fault lines. Some saw only gratitude, a life saved, a debt owed, the undeniable humanity of the act. Others saw complexity, the awkward reality of feeling indebted to a prisoner of war, to someone whose country was killing American boys overseas, to an enemy who had just committed an act of compassion that couldn't be reconciled with propaganda. Tom Mitchell stood in his store that night, surrounded by neighbors who had come to offer support and to process their own confusion. "She saved Emma," he said simply. "That's all that matters to me." But it wasn't all that mattered, not to everyone. Pastor Williams from the Baptist Church raised concerns about sending the wrong message, about treating enemy prisoners as heroes when American soldiers were dying in Europe. Mrs. Henderson from the Historical Society argued that acknowledging the act meant acknowledging the humanity of the enemy. And wasn't that what they were supposed to do? See each other as humans first? The debate spilled into the town council meeting 2 days later. Mayor Robert Clayton sat at the head of the table, listening to hours of testimony from citizens, who couldn't agree on what the appropriate response should be. Thank her, ignore it, request her transfer, demand special consideration. We have protocols for this, the mayor said finally, his voice heavy with unprecedented circumstance. We'll draft a letter of gratitude and send it to the camp commander. Beyond that, it's a military matter. But the letter wasn't enough for Sarah Mitchell. She appeared at the mayor's office the next morning with a request that made him close his office door before responding. You want to do what? I want to visit her, Sarah repeated. I want to thank her in person. She saved my daughter's life. The least I can do is look her in the eye and say thank you. The request climbed the chain of command with the slow grind of military bureaucracy, from Camp Swift to Dallas, then Washington. At each level, the decision was passed upward. No one wanted to set this precedent. Colonel Marcus Webb, a career officer who trusted rules because they existed for a reason, read Sarah Mitchell's request 3 times before summoning Captain Morrison. Tell me exactly what happened. Morrison recited the facts: an arterial bleed, catastrophic blood loss, immediate intervention. Without prisoner W4487, he said, the child would have died. Webb stared at the papers. In 2 years commanding POW camps, he had never faced this. The regulations don't cover this, he said finally. No, sir, Morrison agreed. They don't. The response from 8th Service Command came back a week later. A bureaucratic masterpiece of non-decision that effectively granted local commanders discretion while avoiding any official policy change. In practice, it meant Colonel Webb could authorize the visit if he chose to, and he could deny it if he chose to, and headquarters would support either decision. Webb called in his staff officers for consultation. The opinions varied wildly. Some argued that allowing civilian interaction with prisoners would undermine camp security, would create precedents that could be exploited, would send the wrong message about fraternization with enemy forces. Others argued that denying a mother's request to thank the person who saved her child's life would be seen as cruel, would damage civilian relations with the military, would make the camp look heartless in the eyes of the local community. The debate continued for 3 days. Webb listened to all perspectives, asked clarifying questions, requested legal opinions from the Judge Advocate General's office. The JAG response was characteristically careful. No regulations prohibited the visit, but no regulations explicitly authorized it either. On the 4th day, Webb made his decision. He would allow 1 visit under strict supervision, in a controlled setting, with clear protocols about what could and could not be discussed. If it went well, it would set a precedent. If it went poorly, it would never be repeated. He called Sarah Mitchell personally to deliver the news. You'll have 30 minutes, he said, in the camp conference room. An interpreter will be present along with security personnel. No physical contact, no exchange of items. Do you understand the terms? Yes, sir, Sarah said. Thank you. Webb hung up the phone and stared out his office window at the camp compound spread across the Texas prairie. He had just made a decision that could define his career, for better or worse. Time would tell which. The conference room at Camp Swift was austere, functional, designed for administrative meetings rather than human connection. Greta sat at the wooden table, her hands folded in her lap, her posture rigid with the uncertainty of someone who had been told only that a visitor was coming. Nothing more. She had been questioned extensively after the incident. Had she been attempting to escape? Had she been trying to gain favor with authorities? Had there been any ulterior motive beyond the immediate medical response? The questions had been professional, not accusatory, but they reinforced the reality of her position. A prisoner whose actions would always be viewed through the lens of suspicion. Captain Morrison had defended her unequivocally. She responded as any trained medical professional would respond, he'd told the inquiry board. Her actions were instinctive, professional, and life-saving. Nothing more, nothing less. Now she waited, unsure of what was coming, aware only that Colonel Webb himself had authorized this meeting, which meant it was significant in ways she couldn't yet understand. The door opened. Sarah Mitchell entered, her movements tentative, followed by an interpreter and a security officer who positioned himself by the wall. Sarah's eyes found Greta's face, and for a long moment neither woman spoke. "Tell her," Sarah said to the interpreter, her voice thick with emotion. "Tell her that she saved my daughter's life, and I will never forget what she did." The interpreter translated. Greta's expression remained controlled, but something shifted in her eyes. Recognition of the moment's weight, of the bridge being built across the space between enemy nations. "Tell her," Greta responded in careful German, "that I was simply doing what I was trained to do. Any nurse would have done the same." Sarah shook her head before the translation finished. "No," she said firmly. "Not any nurse. You saved her. Thank you." The words lingered gratitude offered to an enemy, humanity acknowledged across battle lines. Propaganda dissolved in the presence of a single act of compassion. They spoke for 27 minutes, mediated by an interpreter and constrained by protocol, but real. Sarah showed a photograph of Emma, healed, stitches fading. Greta asked precise questions, her medical training unmistakable. "I have children," Greta said quietly. "2 boys in Munich. I haven't heard from them in 7 months." Sarah saw her not as a prisoner, but as a mother. "I hope you see them again soon," she said. The meeting ended. Sarah hesitated, then spoke directly. "Thank you for everything." Greta understood. She nodded. "You are welcome." Word spread quickly through Camp Swift. Prisoners whispered about it. American staff debated its meaning. Colonel Webb documented the meeting, concluding, "When prisoners retain their humanity through service, we reinforce our own values." Greta returned to the infirmary, officially unchanged, but trusted more, given responsibility, treated with professional respect. Emma recovered fully. Years later, she would tell the story whenever asked why war was never simple to her. Bastrop never reached consensus. Some resisted gratitude toward an enemy. Others saw proof that compassion survived war. The war continued. The prisoners went home. Greta reunited with her sons and returned to nursing. She said little about captivity, only that she had been treated fairly. The moment itself lasted minutes. Its impact endured. No policies changed, but something shifted in Camp Swift and Bastrop, and in the quiet recognition that even in war, humanity persists.